Alex Carter sat in his small, cluttered office on the third floor of a modest building downtown. The room smelled faintly of coffee and old books, a scent that Alex had grown to love over the years. His desk was covered with stacks of papers, legal briefs, and sticky notes scribbled with reminders. A framed picture of his parents stood proudly at the corner of the desk, a constant reminder of where he came from and why he worked so hard. It had been only 6 months since Alex graduated from law school, but already he felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. He wasn't working for one of those big fancy firms with glass elevators and expensive suits. Instead, he was part of a smaller practice called Justice for All, a place known for taking on cases others ignored. Most of their clients were ordinary people who couldn't afford high-priced lawyers or navigate the confusing maze of the legal system alone. Alex liked it that way. It made him feel like he was making a difference, even if the paychecks weren't as big as they could have been. The phone rang just as Alex was about to take a sip of his lukewarm coffee. He glanced at the caller ID, which showed an unfamiliar number. For a moment he hesitated, wondering whether to answer. But something inside him told him to pick up. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was the tiny voice in his head reminding him that every call could be someone in need. "Hello?" Alex said, his voice calm but professional. On the other end of the line was a woman named Maria Lopez. Her voice trembled as she spoke, each word heavy with emotion. She explained that her son, Diego, had been arrested during a protest against police brutality. According to Maria, Diego hadn't done anything wrong. He'd simply been standing there, holding a sign, when officers singled him out and dragged him away. Now he was sitting in jail, charged with disorderly conduct and resisting arrest. Maria's voice cracked as she described what happened. "They didn't care that he was peaceful," she said, her words barely above a whisper. "They saw his skin color and assumed the worst." Alex listened carefully, his heart sinking with every detail. He knew stories like this all too well. Growing up in a working-class neighborhood, he'd seen how the system treated people differently based on the color of their skin. It wasn't fair, and it wasn't right. As Maria continued talking, Alex found himself gripping the phone tighter, his knuckles turning white. When Maria finished speaking, there was a long pause. Alex took a deep breath before responding. "Ms. Lopez," he began, choosing his words carefully. "I understand how difficult this must be for you and your family. I want to help. Can we meet tomorrow morning to discuss the case?" Maria sounded relieved, almost grateful. "Thank you, Mr. Carter. Thank you so much. We'll do whatever it takes." After hanging up, Alex leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling. He felt a mix of emotions swirling inside him: anger, frustration, determination. This wasn't just another case, it was personal. If he could help Diego, maybe he could prove that the law wasn't just a tool for the powerful. Maybe he could show that justice was still possible, even in a world that often seemed rigged against certain groups of people. The next morning, Alex arrived early at the office. He wanted to review some notes before meeting Maria and Diego. When they walked in, Alex immediately noticed the exhaustion etched into Maria's face. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. Beside her stood Diego, a young man with dark hair and serious eyes. Despite his youthful appearance, there was a maturity about him, as though recent events had forced him to grow up faster than he should have. Alex greeted them warmly, offering them seats across from his desk. "Thank you for coming in," he said. "I know this is a tough time for both of you, but I promise I'll do everything I can to help." Maria nodded, clutching a tissue in her hand. "We trust you, Mr. Carter. That's why we're here." Diego remained quiet, his gaze fixed on the floor. Alex could tell he was nervous, maybe even scared. He decided to start by asking simple questions, letting Diego share his side of the story at his own pace. "Can you tell me what happened that day?" Alex asked gently. Diego hesitated for a moment before speaking. His voice was soft but steady as he recounted the events leading up to his arrest. He explained that he had joined the protest because he believed in the cause. He wanted to stand up for his community and demand change. Everything had been peaceful until a group of officers approached, singling out several protesters, including Diego for no apparent reason. They didn't ask any questions, Diego said, his voice trembling slightly. They just grabbed me and threw me into the back of a police car. I didn't resist. I didn't fight back, but they still charged me with resisting arrest. Alex listened intently, jotting down notes as Diego spoke. By the time Diego finished, Alex felt a surge of anger bubbling inside him. What Diego described wasn't just an isolated incident. It was part of a larger pattern. Too many times people of color were targeted unfairly, their rights trampled upon without consequence. Once Diego finished, Alex turned his attention to Maria. "Do you have any evidence that might support Diego's account?" he asked. "Anything at all? A video, photos, witness statements?" Maria reached into her bag and pulled out a flash drive. "A friend of mine recorded part of the protest," she explained. "She sent me this footage after Diego was arrested. You can see everything clearly." Alex accepted the flash drive, feeling a flicker of hope. Evidence like this could make a huge difference in court. But he also knew that proving Diego's innocence wouldn't be easy. The system was stacked against them, and powerful forces would do whatever it took to protect themselves. As the meeting came to an end, Alex shook hands with Maria and Diego, promising to keep them updated on the case. Once they left, he plugged the flash drive into his computer and watched the footage. It was exactly as Maria had described. Clear, undeniable proof that Diego had been treated unjustly. Watching it filled Alex with a renewed sense. The days following the meeting with Maria and Diego were a whirlwind for Alex. He spent hours reviewing the video footage, studying every frame to understand what had happened that day. The recording showed Diego standing quietly among the crowd, holding a sign that read, "Justice for all." There was no shouting, no aggression, just a young man peacefully expressing his beliefs. Then out of nowhere, two officers approached him, grabbed him by the arms and dragged him away while others looked on. It was clear to anyone watching that Diego hadn't resisted or caused any trouble. Yet, the charges against him painted a completely different picture. With the evidence in hand, Alex began preparing the case. He knew it wouldn't be easy. The prosecution would likely argue that Diego had provoked the officers or that the arrest was justified under some vague, legal reasoning, but Alex was determined to expose the truth. He believed that if he could present the facts clearly and convincingly, the jury would see through the lies. Still, as confident as Alex felt about the strength of their case, he couldn't ignore the hostility he encountered almost immediately. When he filed the necessary paperwork at the courthouse, the clerks gave him strange looks. One of them muttered something under her breath about troublemakers, loud enough for Alex to hear, but too quiet to confront directly. Even the judge assigned to the case, Judge Harold Whitman, had a reputation for being harsh and unsympathetic, especially toward defendants from marginalized communities. Alex tried not to let these things get to him. He reminded himself why he became a lawyer, to fight for people who didn't have a voice. But the weight of the situation pressed down on him more than he cared to admit. This wasn't just another courtroom battle. It was a test of whether justice could truly prevail in a system stacked against those like Diego. During one of the pre-trial hearings, Alex got his first real taste of what he was up against. As he walked into the courtroom, he noticed the opposing counsel, Richard Hayes, already seated at the prosecutor's table. Hayes was a tall, broad-shouldered man with sharp features and an air of arrogance. He wore an expensive suit and carried himself with the confidence of someone who always won. Alex had heard of Hayes before. He was known for taking controversial cases and winning them, often using aggressive tactics to intimidate defendants and their lawyers. When Alex took his seat, Hayes glanced over at him with a smirk. "Fresh. Out of law school, huh?" Hayes said, his tone dripping with condescension. "You sure you're ready for this?" Alex forced a smile, refusing to rise to the bait. "I'm here to represent my client," he replied evenly. "That's all that matters." Hayes chuckled, shaking his head as if amused by Alex's naivety. "Good luck, kid. You'll need it." The hearing itself was short but tense. Hayes argued that Diego's arrest was justified, citing vague claims of disorderly behavior and resisting authority. He dismissed the video footage as inconclusive, suggesting it didn't tell the whole story. Meanwhile, Judge Whitman sat at the bench, his expression unreadable. Alex couldn't shake the feeling that Whitman wasn't interested in fairness. He seemed more concerned with keeping things moving quickly and avoiding controversy. As the hearing progressed, Alex noticed subtle, and sometimes not so subtle, acts of discrimination directed at both him and Diego. Other attorneys in the room whispered behind their hands, casting judgmental glances in Alex's direction. Some even went so far as to question aloud why someone like him would take on a case like this. Alex tried to brush it off, telling himself that their opinions didn't matter. But deep down, it stung. He couldn't help but wonder if they saw him as just another outsider trying to disrupt the status quo. Despite the hostility, Alex refused to back down. He leaned heavily on his team at Justice for All, particularly Emily Dawson, the firm's paralegal. Emily was in her late 40s with short brown hair and a no-nonsense attitude. She'd been working in law for over 20 years and had seen it all. To Alex, she was a mentor, a sounding board, and a source of encouragement when things got tough. One afternoon, after another grueling day at the courthouse, Alex found himself venting to Emily about the challenges he faced. They were sitting in the office break room, sipping coffee and surrounded by stacks of files and papers. "It's like they don't even want to hear the truth," Alex said, frustration evident in his voice. "Every time I try to make a point, they shut me down or twist my words. How am I supposed to win when the deck is stacked against us?" Emily listened patiently, nodding as he spoke. When he finished, she placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Listen, Alex," she said firmly. "You're not going to change the world overnight. But that doesn't mean you stop fighting. People like Diego need someone in their corner, someone who believes in them even when the odds are against them. That's why we do this job." Her words struck a chord with Alex. He realized that winning the case wasn't just about proving Diego's innocence. It was about showing that the system could still work for people like him. It was about standing up and saying that racism and prejudice had no place in the courtroom. Determined to keep pushing forward, Alex threw himself into preparing for trial. He spent long nights poring over legal precedents, crafting arguments, and strategizing with Emily. Together, they identified potential weaknesses in Hayes' case and brainstormed ways to counter them. They also reached out to witnesses who could testify on Diego's behalf, including Sarah Bennett, a local journalist who had covered the protest. Sarah was a petite woman in her early 30s with curly red hair and a quick wit. She agreed to meet Alex at a small cafe near the courthouse to discuss her involvement in the case. Over cups of tea, she recounted what she had witnessed that day. Like Maria's friend, Sarah had recorded parts of the protest, capturing images of Diego being arrested. Her footage corroborated the version of events Alex had pieced together, providing yet another layer of evidence to support their defense. "I've seen this kind of thing happen before," Sarah said, her voice tinged with sadness. "It's always the same. The police pick someone out of the crowd, usually someone who looks different from them, and then justify it later by saying they were causing trouble. It's wrong, plain and simple." Alex nodded, grateful for her willingness to help. Having Sarah on their side gave him hope that they could expose the truth and hold the officers accountable for their actions. As the trial date approached, Alex felt a mix of nerves and determination. He knew the road ahead would be difficult, but he also knew he couldn't give up. Diego's future, and the futures of countless others like him, depended on what happened in that courtroom. For Alex, this wasn't just a case. It was a chance to prove that justice wasn't just a word written in law books. It was something worth fighting for, no matter how hard the battle might be. The days leading up to the trial were a blur of activity for Alex. He spent most of his time buried in paperwork, reviewing evidence and rehearsing arguments. Emily was by his side every step of the way, helping him organize documents, double-check facts, and prepare for any curveballs the prosecution might throw. Despite their hard work, Alex couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing, a key piece of the puzzle that would make their case unshakable. One evening, as they sat in the office late into the night, Alex voiced his concerns. "I Feel like we've got strong evidence, he said, tapping his pen against the desk. But Hayes is slick. He'll find a way to twist things around. We need something more. Emily leaned back in her chair, her brow furrowed in thought. After a moment, she spoke. What about character witnesses? People who can speak to Diego's personality and show the jury he's not the kind of person they're trying to paint him as. Alex nodded slowly, considering the idea. It made sense. If they could humanize Diego, if they could show the jury that he was just a regular kid with dreams and values, it might help counter the narrative Hayes was building. But finding the right witnesses wouldn't be easy. They needed people who knew Diego well and could testify honestly without being intimidated by the courtroom setting. The next day, Alex met with Maria and Diego to discuss the plan. When he explained the importance of character witnesses, Maria immediately offered suggestions. Diego has always been active in our church, she said. Pastor Lewis knows him really well. And there's also Mrs. Ramirez. She's been like a second mother to him since he was little. Alex jotted down the names, feeling a spark of hope. These were exactly the kinds of people who could make a difference. Over the next few days, he reached out to both Pastor Lewis and Mrs. Ramirez, explaining what their testimony could mean for the case. Both agreed to help, moved by the injustice Diego had faced and eager to support the family. Pastor Lewis was a tall, soft-spoken man with a warm smile and a deep voice that commanded attention. During their meeting, he shared stories about Diego's involvement in the church community, how he volunteered at food drives, mentored younger kids, and always went out of his way to lend a hand. Diego's one of the good ones, Pastor Lewis said firmly. He cares about others and he believes in doing what's right. I'd stake my reputation on it. Mrs. Ramirez, on the other hand, brought a personal touch to the conversation. A retired schoolteacher with silver hair and a gentle demeanor, she spoke fondly of Diego growing up. That boy used to come over after school all the time, she recalled, her eyes lighting up. He'd help me carry groceries, fix things around the house. He even taught me how to use my phone once. She chuckled softly before adding, He's a good soul, Mr. Carter. Anyone who says otherwise doesn't know him. With these testimonies lined up, Alex felt a renewed sense of confidence. Still, he knew the prosecution wouldn't make things easy. Richard Hayes was a master manipulator, skilled at turning even the strongest evidence against the defense. Alex had seen him in action during the pre-trial hearings, and it was clear Hayes wouldn't hesitate to play dirty if it meant securing a conviction. As the trial date drew closer, tensions ran high. Alex found himself replaying every possible scenario in his mind, imagining how Hayes might attack their case and strategizing ways to counter each move. He practiced his opening statement until he could recite it in his sleep, making sure every word conveyed clarity and conviction. He also spent hours going over the video footage, ensuring he could highlight the moments that proved Diego's innocence. On the morning of the trial, Alex arrived at the courthouse early. The air buzzed with anticipation as reporters, spectators, and court staff filled the halls. Outside, a small group of protesters held signs supporting Diego, chanting slogans about justice and equality. Alex paused for a moment to watch them, feeling a surge of gratitude for the community rallying behind his client. It reminded him why he had chosen this path, to stand up for those who couldn't stand alone. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. Judge Whitman sat sternly at the bench, his expression unreadable. Hayes was already seated at the prosecutor's table, flipping through papers with an air of smug confidence. When Alex took his place beside Diego, he noticed the young man's hands trembling slightly. Without saying a word, Alex gave Diego a reassuring nod, silently promising to do everything in his power to protect him. The trial began with opening statements. Hayes went first, painting a picture of Diego as a troublemaker who had deliberately provoked the officers. His tone was measured but laced with disdain, and he skillfully twisted the facts to fit his narrative. By the time he finished, Alex could see the jury exchanging uneasy glances, clearly swayed by Hayes's words. When it was Alex's turn, he stood slowly, taking a deep breath to steady himself. He looked directly at the jury, his voice calm but firm. Ladies and gentlemen, Of the jury, he began, this case isn't about disorderly conduct or resisting arrest. It's about fairness. It's about whether we live in a society where everyone is treated equally under the law, or whether some people are judged not by their actions, but by the color of their skin. He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. The evidence will show you that my client, Diego Lopez, did nothing wrong. He was peacefully protesting, exercising his constitutional rights, when he was singled out and arrested without cause. This isn't justice, it's prejudice, and it's up to you to decide whether we let it stand. As Alex delivered his statement, he kept his eyes locked on the jury, searching for any sign of understanding or empathy. Some jurors nodded slightly, while others scribbled notes. Though he couldn't be sure, Alex felt a flicker of hope that his message was getting through. The prosecution's case followed, with Hayes calling several police officers to the stand. Each testified that Diego had been aggressive and uncooperative, contradicting the video footage Alex had prepared. Hayes cross-examined them with precision, guiding their answers to reinforce his version of events. It was frustrating to watch, but Alex remained focused, knowing his chance to challenge their credibility would come later. When it was the defense's turn, Alex called Sarah Bennett to the stand. Her testimony was powerful, providing a first-hand account of what she had witnessed during the protest. She described seeing Diego standing quietly among the crowd, holding his sign, and then being abruptly detained by officers. Her description matched the video footage perfectly, leaving little room for doubt. Hayes tried to discredit her during cross-examination, accusing her of bias and suggesting she had edited the video to favor the defense. But Sarah held her ground, calmly refuting each accusation with sharp factual responses. By the time she stepped down, Alex felt a wave of relief wash over him. They had scored a crucial victory. Next, Alex called Pastor Lewis and Mrs. Ramirez to the stand. Their testimonies added a deeply personal dimension to the case, painting Diego as a kind, responsible young man who cared about his community. Jury listened intently, some visibly moved by the heartfelt accounts. For the first time since the trial began, Alex allowed himself to believe they might actually win. However, the battle was far from over. Hayes still had tricks up his sleeve, and Alex knew the prosecution would fight tooth and nail to undermine their case. As the day came to a close, Alex gathered his notes and prepared for the challenges ahead. He glanced at Diego, who gave him a small, grateful smile. In that moment, Alex reminded himself why he was here, to prove that justice wasn't just a privilege for the powerful, but a right for everyone. No matter how daunting the odds, he was determined to see it through. The trial was reaching its midpoint, and the tension inside the courtroom was palpable. Each day brought new challenges for Alex, as Richard Hayes continued to throw obstacles in their path. Despite the strength of their evidence and the heartfelt testimonies from Pastor Lewis, Mrs. Ramirez, and Sarah Bennett, Alex couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to go wrong. Hayes was too smooth, too calculated, and Alex knew he wouldn't let them win without a fight. On the fourth day of the trial, disaster struck. Just as Alex was preparing to present the video footage, the cornerstone of their case, a technician, informed him that the flash drive containing the file had malfunctioned. The video, which showed Diego being arrested without cause, was gone. There was no backup, no second copy. It was as if the evidence had vanished into thin air. Alex felt his stomach drop. He immediately suspected foul play but had no proof. All he could do was try to remain calm and think of a solution. Without the video, their entire case was in jeopardy. How could they prove Diego's innocence when the prosecution would simply deny everything? When the judge called the court back into session, Alex requested a brief recess to address the issue. Judge Whitman granted it reluctantly, clearly annoyed by the delay. In the hallway outside the courtroom, Alex paced back and forth, running his hands through his hair. Emily stood nearby, her arms crossed, looking equally frustrated. "What do we do now?" Alex asked, his voice tight with desperation. "That video was our best shot at proving Diego didn't resist arrest," Emily sighed, thinking hard. "We need to adapt," she said finally. Hayes will use this to his advantage if we don't act fast. Let's focus on what we still have. Witness testimonies, character references, and any other supporting details. We can't let them break us. Alex nodded slowly, taking a deep breath. She was right. They couldn't afford to fall apart now. He needed to regroup and find another way to make their case compelling. With Emily's encouragement, Alex returned to the courtroom, determined to push forward despite the setback. Back inside, the trial resumed. Hayes wasted no time exploiting the missing video. During his cross-examination of Alex's witnesses, he repeatedly pointed out the lack of direct evidence showing Diego's arrest. Without concrete proof, Hayes declared smugly, all we have are opinions and assumptions. This court needs facts, not feelings. The jury seemed uncertain, exchanging glances as Hayes drove his point home. Alex clenched his fists under the table, forcing himself to stay composed. He reminded himself that giving up wasn't an option, not when Diego's future hung in the balance. Later that evening, after the day's proceedings ended, Alex met with Maria and Diego at a small cafe near the courthouse. The mood was somber. Maria looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, while Diego sat quietly staring at the table. Alex hated seeing them like this, but he owed them honesty. I'm sorry, Alex began, his voice heavy with regret. We lost the video. I don't know how it happened, but we're going to keep fighting. We'll find another way to show the truth. Maria reached across the table, placing a hand on Alex's arm. You've already done so much for us, she said softly. Don't blame yourself. We trust you, Alex. Whatever happens, we know you're doing your best. Her words gave Alex a small measure of comfort, but Diego's silence worried him. The young man hadn't said much all day, and Alex feared he might be losing hope. Determined to lift his spirits, Alex turned to Diego and spoke directly to him. Diego, he said firmly, this isn't over. We've still got people who believe in you, people willing to stand up and say you didn't deserve what happened. That counts for something. You can't give up, okay? For a moment, Diego didn't respond. Then slowly he nodded. I just want this to be over, he murmured. I want to go back to my life. And you will, Alex promised. But first, we have to finish this fight. The next morning, Alex arrived at the office early, brainstorming ideas with Emily. They went over every piece of evidence they had left, searching for anything that could fill the void left by the missing video. As they worked, Emily suddenly snapped her fingers. What about the officer's body cam footage, she suggested. If they were wearing cameras during the arrest, those recordings should exist. We can file a motion to get access to them. It was a long shot, but it was worth a try. Alex quickly drafted the motion, arguing that the body cam footage was crucial to ensuring a fair trial. He submitted it to Judge Whitman later that day, knowing full well the judge might deny it. To everyone's surprise, however, Whitman granted the request, ordering the prosecution to produce the footage within 48 hours. When the body cam videos finally arrived, Alex and Emily pored over them eagerly. The footage wasn't perfect, it was shaky and incomplete, but it captured enough to corroborate Diego's version of events. One clip clearly showed Diego standing peacefully before officers approached him. Another angle revealed that he hadn't resisted or provoked anyone. While the quality wasn't ideal, it was better than nothing. With renewed energy, Alex prepared to introduce the new evidence in court. But before he could do so, Hayes filed an objection, claiming the footage was irrelevant and shouldn't be admitted. Judge Whitman sided with Hayes, ruling that the videos couldn't be shown to the jury. Once again, Alex found himself blocked at every turn. Frustrated and disheartened, Alex confided in Emily after the hearing. How are we supposed to win if they keep shutting us down? He asked bitterly. Every time we find something that helps our case, they take it away. Emily placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. This is why they do it, she said gently. They want to wear you down, make you feel like there's no point in fighting anymore. But you can't let them win, Alex. Not when so much is at stake. Her words resonated deeply with Alex. He realized that quitting wasn't an option. Not when Diego and countless others like him were counting on him to expose the truth. He decided to take a different approach. If they couldn't rely on physical evidence, they would shift the focus to the broader issue of systemic racism and bias within the justice system. That night, Alex stayed late at the office, drafting a bold strategy. Instead of solely focusing on disproving the charges against Diego, he planned to highlight the larger context of racial profiling and discrimination. He wanted to show the jury that this wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a pattern that affected countless individuals. By framing the case in this way, he hoped to appeal to their sense of fairness and morality. The following day, Alex put his plan into action. During his questioning of witnesses, he subtly wove in questions about racial bias and unequal treatment. He asked one officer whether he had targeted Diego specifically because of his appearance, prompting an indignant response. Though the officer denied it, the seed of doubt had been planted in the jurors' minds. Hayes noticed what Alex was doing and grew increasingly agitated. During a recess, he confronted Alex in the hallway, his face flushed with anger. "You're playing dirty," Hayes accused, jabbing a finger in Alex's direction. "Stick to the facts, Carter. Don't drag politics into this." Alex met his gaze calmly. "This isn't about politics," he replied. "It's about justice, and if you can't see the difference, then maybe you're the one who doesn't belong here." Hayes sneered but walked away, leaving Alex alone in the corridor. Though the confrontation unsettled him, Alex felt a spark of determination ignite within him. He was tired of playing by rules designed to protect the powerful. It was time to fight back, not just for Diego, but for everyone who had ever been treated unfairly because of their race. As the trial entered its final stages, Alex prepared for his closing argument. He knew this was his last chance to sway the jury, to remind them of the humanity behind the legal jargon and technicalities. He spent hours rehearsing his speech, refining every word until it conveyed exactly what he wanted to say. By the time he stepped into the courtroom the next morning, Alex felt ready. He glanced at Diego and Maria, giving them a reassuring nod. Then, turning to face the jury, he took a deep breath and began speaking. His voice was steady, his tone sincere. "This case is about more than one young man's arrest," he said. "It's about whether we live in a society where everyone is treated equally, or whether some people are judged not by their actions, but by the color of their skin. Diego Lopez is not perfect. None of us are. But he deserves to be treated fairly, just like anyone else." He paused, letting his words sink in. The evidence shows that Diego did nothing wrong. He was exercising his right to protest, standing up for what he believed in. Yet, instead of protecting him, the officers singled him out and arrested him, without cause. Why? Because it was easier to assume guilt than to seek the truth. Alex's voice grew stronger as he continued. "We all have a choice to make today. We can look the other way, pretend this doesn't matter, and let fear and prejudice dictate our decisions. Or we can choose to stand up for what's right, for justice, for fairness, for equality. I'm asking you to make the right choice." When Alex finished, the courtroom fell silent. For a moment, no one moved or spoke. Then, Judge Whitson instructed the jury to begin deliberations. As they filed out of the room, Alex exhaled deeply, feeling both drained and hopeful. He had done everything he could. Now it was up to the jury to decide. The wait for the jury's verdict was excruciating. Alex, Maria, and Diego sat in silence in a small room near the courtroom, the air thick with tension. Outside, reporters milled about, eager for any update on the case. Inside, the mood was heavy with anticipation. Every creak of the door or distant murmur made them jump, hoping it signaled the end of deliberations. Alex tried to keep his composure, but his mind raced with possibilities. He replayed every moment of the trial in his head, the arguments, the testimonies, the missing video, the body cam footage that wasn't allowed into evidence. He wondered if he had done enough, if his closing statement had resonated with the jury, if they could see past the biases Hayes had tried so hard to reinforce. Despite his efforts to stay positive, doubt gnawed at him. Maria sat beside Diego, holding his hand tightly. Her eyes were red from crying, but she managed a brave smile whenever Diego glanced her way. Diego, for his part, remained quiet, staring at the floor as though trying to will the verdict into existence. He hadn't said much since the trial began, but Alex knew the weight of uncertainty was crushing him. Hours passed, and still, there was no word from the jury. Emily joined them eventually, bringing coffee and sandwiches. She didn't say much, just offered a reassuring pat on Alex's shoulder before sitting down. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the occasional rustle of papers or the faint hum of voices from the hallway. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, a court clerk appeared at the door. "They've reached a verdict," she announced quietly. Alex stood up quickly, his heart pounding. He exchanged a glance with Maria and Diego, who both looked pale but determined. "Let's go," he said softly, leading them back to the courtroom. The atmosphere inside was electric. Reporters scrambled to take their seats, cameras clicking as everyone filed in. Richard Hayes sat confidently at the prosecutor's table, flipping through notes as if he already knew the outcome. Judge Whitman entered moments later, taking his seat with his usual stern expression. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" the judge asked. The foreman, a middle-aged man with graying hair, stood up. "We have, Your Honor." A hush fell over the room as the clerk handed the verdict slip to the judge. Whitman scanned it briefly before nodding. "Please read the verdict aloud," he instructed. The foreman cleared his throat, his voice steady but slightly shaky. "On the charge of disorderly conduct, we find the defendant not guilty." A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Maria clutched Diego's arm tightly, tears streaming down her face. "And on the charge of resisting arrest, we find the defendant not guilty." For a moment, no one moved. Then Maria let out a sob of relief, pulling Diego into a tight embrace. The courtroom erupted in cheers, with supporters clapping and shouting words of encouragement. Even some of the jurors smiled faintly, clearly moved by the emotional scene unfolding before them. Alex felt a wave of relief wash over him, followed by an overwhelming sense of pride. He turned to Diego and Maria, offering a wide grin. "You did it," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "You're free." Diego nodded, his eyes glistening with tears. For the first time in weeks, he looked lighter, as though a massive burden had been lifted off his shoulders. "Thank you, Mr. Carter," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the commotion. "I couldn't have done this without you." Outside the courthouse, the celebration continued. Protesters who had gathered earlier cheered loudly, chanting slogans of victory and justice. Reporters swarmed Alex, Maria, and Diego, shoving microphones in their faces and firing questions rapidly. Alex did his best to answer calmly, deflecting praise and focusing instead on the importance of the case. "This isn't just about Diego," he told the crowd. "It's about standing up against injustice and fighting for fairness in our legal system. Today we proved that truth and integrity can prevail, even when the odds are stacked against us." Maria stepped forward next, her voice trembling but strong. "My son is innocent, and I'm grateful for everyone who supported us during this difficult time. This fight isn't over. We still have work to do to ensure no one else has to go through what we did." As the media circus unfolded around them, Alex took a step back, watching the scene with a mixture of pride and exhaustion. He felt drained, physically and emotionally, but also invigorated. Winning this case wasn't just a personal victory. It was a reminder that change was possible, even in a flawed system. Later that evening, after the crowds had dispersed and the reporters had packed up, Alex returned to his office. The building was quiet, the hum of activity replaced by an eerie stillness. He sank into his chair, letting the reality of the day sink in. They had won. But the battle against systemic racism was far from over. There would be more cases like Diego's, more families seeking justice, more young people wrongfully targeted because of their race. Emily found him there, staring blankly at the wall. "You okay?" she asked gently, leaning against the doorway. Alex nodded slowly, Yeah, I'm fine, just thinking. About what? He hesitated before answering. About how much work there is left to do. We won today, but it doesn't fix everything. People like Diego shouldn't have to fight this hard just to prove their innocence. Emily sighed, pulling up a chair beside him. You're right. It doesn't fix everything. But it's a start. Every case like this chips away at the system, makes people think twice about how they treat others. And you made a difference today, Alex. Don't forget that. Her words brought a small smile to his face. She was right. They had taken a step forward, however small. It wasn't perfect, but it mattered. The next morning, Alex met with Maria and Diego one last time to discuss the aftermath of the trial. Though the charges had been dropped, the experience had left its mark on them. Diego admitted he was nervous about returning to school and facing judgment from classmates who might not understand what he'd been through. Maria, meanwhile, expressed concern about lingering hostility from law enforcement. We'll figure it out together, Alex assured them. If anyone gives you trouble, call me immediately. You're not alone in this. Before they left, Maria hugged Alex tightly, thanking him once again. You've given us hope, she said. Not just for Diego, but for everyone like him. Thank you for believing in us when no one else would. As they walked away, Alex stood in the doorway of his office, watching them disappear down the hall. For the first time in weeks, he felt a sense of peace. The road ahead would be long and challenging, but he was ready to keep fighting, for Diego, for Maria, and for all the others who deserved justice. Back at his desk, Alex pulled out a fresh notebook and began jotting down ideas for future cases. He knew there would always be obstacles, always be people trying to hold him back. But he also knew that every victory, no matter how small, brought them closer to a fairer, more equitable world. And that was worth fighting for. The victory in Diego's case brought a wave of attention to Alex and his work. Reporters called constantly, asking for interviews and insights into how he had managed to win against such overwhelming odds. Social media buzzed with praise for his dedication, and strangers stopped him on the street to thank him for standing up for justice. While Alex appreciated the recognition, he didn't let it go to his head. He knew this was just one battle in a much larger war, a war that wouldn't be won overnight. In the weeks following the trial, Alex threw himself back into his work at Justice for All. The firm received more calls than ever before, with people seeking help for cases similar to Diego's. Some were victims of racial profiling, while others faced discrimination in housing, employment, or education. Each call reminded Alex of the systemic issues plaguing society, but it also fueled his determination to keep fighting. One afternoon, as Alex sorted through a stack of new case files, Emily walked into his office carrying a tray of coffee. She set it down on his desk and leaned against the wall, watching him carefully. You've been working nonstop since the trial, she said. When are you going to take a break? Alex shrugged, flipping through another file. I don't have time to rest. There's too much to do. Emily sighed, shaking her head. You're not helping anyone if you burn yourself out. You need to recharge, Alex. Trust me. These fights aren't going anywhere. Her words hit home, but Alex brushed them off. Maybe later, he muttered, already distracted by the next task on his list. Despite his reluctance to slow down, Alex couldn't deny the toll the past few months had taken on him. His sleep was restless, filled with dreams of courtrooms and verdicts. He often found himself replaying moments from Diego's trial, wondering what he could have done differently or better. But even amid the exhaustion, there was a sense of purpose, a belief that every step forward mattered, no matter how small. A few weeks after the trial, Alex decided to visit Maria and Diego at their home. It was a modest apartment on the edge of town, decorated with family photos and handmade crafts. When Alex arrived, Maria greeted him warmly, inviting him inside. Diego sat on the couch, scrolling through his phone, but he looked up and smiled when Alex entered. How are things going? Alex asked, sitting down across from them. Maria nodded, though her expression was thoughtful. We're doing okay. Diego's back in school and things seem calmer. but I still worry about what might happen in the future. I get it, Alex said, his tone reassuring. It's not easy, especially when you know the system isn't always fair, but remember, you're not alone. If anything happens, call me right away. Diego spoke up then, his voice softer than usual. Do you think people will forget about my case? About what happened? Alex hesitated, choosing his words carefully. Some might, he admitted. But others won't. Your story has inspired a lot of people, Diego. It's shown them that they can stand up and fight back even when it feels impossible. That matters. Maria placed a hand on Diego's shoulder, giving him a proud smile. He's right, mijo. What you went through wasn't easy, but look at what came out of it. People are talking, thinking, questioning. That's progress. Later that evening, as Alex drove home, he thought about their conversation. Maria and Diego's resilience amazed him. Despite everything they'd endured, they remained hopeful, determined to keep moving forward. It reminded him why he chose this path, to give people like them a chance to reclaim their dignity and demand fairness. Over the next few months, Alex continued taking on challenging cases, each one testing his skills and resolve. One involved a young woman named Lisa Martinez, who had been denied a promotion at work because of her ethnicity. Another centered around a teenager accused of vandalism after defending himself during an altercation. Though the outcomes varied, some victories, some setbacks, Alex never lost sight of his mission. Every client mattered. Every story deserved to be heard. One day, while preparing for a hearing, Alex received an unexpected visitor. A tall, older man introduced himself as Mr. Thompson, a retired judge who had followed Alex's career closely. He explained that he admired Alex's commitment to justice and wanted to offer advice. "You're doing important work," Mr. Thompson said, his voice steady and kind. "But don't underestimate the power of patience. Change doesn't happen overnight. Sometimes planting seeds is enough. You may not see the results immediately, but trust that they'll grow over time." Alex listened intently, nodding as the former judge spoke. "I understand," he replied. "It's just hard not to feel frustrated sometimes. There's so much wrong with the system." Mr. Thompson chuckled softly. "Of course there is. But frustration is part of the process. Use it to fuel your passion, not drain it. And remember, you're not alone. There are others out there fighting the same battles. Together you can make a difference." The conversation stayed with Alex long after Mr. Thompson left. It reinforced what he already knew deep down. The fight for justice wasn't a solo endeavor. It required teamwork, perseverance, and faith in the possibility of change. As the year drew to a close, Alex reflected on all that had happened since Diego's case. He had grown as a lawyer and as a person, learning valuable lessons about resilience, empathy, and the importance of community. Though the road ahead remained uncertain, he felt more prepared than ever to face whatever challenges lay in store. On New Year's Eve, Alex attended a small gathering hosted by Emily. Friends, colleagues, and former clients filled her cozy living room, sharing stories and laughter. Maria and Diego were there too, bringing homemade tamales and cookies. As midnight approached, everyone gathered around to watch the countdown on TV. When the clock struck 12, cheers erupted, and fireworks lit up the sky outside. Alex stood quietly, watching the colorful bursts reflect off the windows. For a moment, he allowed himself to feel hope, not just for himself, but for everyone striving for a better world. "Happy New Year, Alex," Emily said, handing him a cup of sparkling cider. "Happy New Year," he replied, clinking his glass against hers. "Here's to another year of fighting the good fight," she smiled, raising her glass higher. "And here's to winning, even if it's just one step at a time." As the party continued around him, Alex felt a renewed sense of purpose. The journey wasn't over, and the obstacles ahead would be daunting. But he knew he wasn't alone. With allies like Emily, Maria, Diego, and countless others, he was ready to keep pushing forward, for justice, for equality, and for a brighter future.